I had a very busy time. My little boy was finishing his preschool Christmas term. My little boy wasn't 100%, and I remember saying to him, "We just need to get through your Christmas concert, and then after that, you'll be off for holidays and we can chill." And little did I know that actually it was me that was going to be affected by the fact that we were finishing. And I think that I possibly picked up the invasive strip that day, although we'll never know, because I helped out at the Christmas party after his Christmas concert. And I had a bit of a strange feeling in my throat that day. And I remember saying to my mom that evening, I said, I had a very strange sensation in my throat today, and I didn't know what that was. But I thought nothing of it and carried on with the busy end of term shenanigans. And then from then on, I went down quite quickly. At that point, I just still thought it was flu symptoms, feeling really poorly. Just my body was obviously just really run down. And I started then having to miss things, like I missed my little boy being the donkey in a nativity on Christmas Eve. But again, I just thought that it was flu like symptoms. My temperature at that point was close to 40. I wasn't eating at all. And we first phoned the ambulance first came out on Christmas Eve, and two paramedics came in and obviously checked me over. At that point, I could also hardly talk. And I had just been sort of taking rehydration sachets and normal flu meds. They then left me that Christmas Eve and said that it was just flu, like I thought it was, and I needed to just keep on having fluids and rest, and which is what I was doing. My mom then stayed over on Christmas Eve because I was feeling so poorly by then. I still managed to do all the usual things and try to get rid of the evidence of Santa coming and the reindeers, getting rid of the carrots and biting mince pies and doing all of that like I normally did. This was in the early hours of Christmas Day. And then managed to get a little bit of sleep. And around about 5:30 on Christmas Day, I woke up and I said to my mom, I feel like I'm dying. My mom obviously freaked out and panicked and said, "No, you're not. Just relax. You're fine. You're just not well. Stop, being over dramatic." And but I honestly felt at that point that I was dying, and I had never ever felt that way. We then called the ambulance again, and then they came again, two different people, and again they were actually ready to dismiss it as flu once again. And it was only when my mom said to them, "How does my daughter know that she doesn't have pneumonia?" um, Completely out of the blue that my mom asked that. We weren't really aware of pneumonia symptoms or anything going around. And it was only when she asked that they then said, "Okay, we'll take her into A&E." I was trying to sleep on the seats, but I couldn't. And I honestly, after that moment, I can't remember anything else. I'm not sure if I passed out or we don't really know. I don't remember anything else. Um, but what it turns out that I actually had was invasive strep A, double bacterial pneumonia, and then that had developed into sepsis. They then first took me to, I think it's called the high care ward, where they had to drain over 2 liters of fluid off my lungs, and from then they I've now been told after my visit to the ICU that in those hours I deteriorated very quickly, and I had to be placed in an induced coma on Christmas Day. So around 8:30 on Christmas Day, I was placed into the medically induced coma. They did tell my parents that they couldn't guarantee anything, that I was just really, very sick. I've also been told afterwards that I was the one to watch in the ICU that Christmas Day because I was so sick. And I then spent 8 days in an induced coma while my body tried to fight all of those three very serious illnesses. I was in the ICU for three weeks in the ICU. And yeah, once again, just really, really thankful for the people that were around me and how they were with my family and especially my little boy while I was in hospital. But that was also part of what made me fight to get out of hospital to get back to my boy. Funny enough, once I was out of the hospital, I think that was actually harder work than when I was in the hospital. I was grateful to obviously be off the feeding tubes and the drips and everything else, but the real hard work began once I was actually home and realized how much my life had changed. Um, and little by little, very little by little, I started getting stronger. In the beginning, I was too weak to even hold a book to do reading. My concentration was gone. I struggled with sleeping, all those things. A lot of those things are actually still around, even though it's nearly 1 year until for the first anniversary, but I still have quite severe brain fog. Um, I still struggle to concentrate a lot of days. Some days I'm able to read, and other days I'm not able to read. Um, I also saw a psychologist while I was in the hospital because I was having some hallucinations at one point in the ICU. I was seeing people, seeing figures, and I also used to see the floor moving up and down. So that's something I would say to people, that if you are in recovery, just tell them however you are feeling. Don't think, oh, I don't want to tell them that. Rather just tell them the things that you are seeing or the things that you are feeling, because the quicker you can have help, the better. So I told them the minute I had that. And as I've found with a lot of the sepsis recovery, once I've told people, they've said actually that's one of the more common fallouts that's very common for people to have. So I then felt a bit more okay. I'm not losing my mind yet. And I think also the trauma of the fact that a lot of people, if you've been through trauma, it sometimes takes place away from your home. If you've been knocked by a car or you've been in a horse riding accident or something, your home is still your safe place. But because I was the sickest of my life in my home, it's really, really very scary to think that I was literally hours away from dying in my own home. And if we had the money, I would take Alfie and go somewhere else and be somewhere else. But at the same time, I do have to obviously face it, because whether it's this Christmas or next Christmas, I would have to face it. And it is also tricky because some people think, well, surely you should just be like, hey, I'm here, the first Christmas, I've survived it. But not when you're dealing with PTSD and actual physical things. Hopefully by next Christmas or afterwards. But I think Christmas will always be a tricky time. And once again, I've got the ICU phoning next week, the week before Christmas, and I have my therapist phoning the week after Christmas, because everybody is obviously very aware of just how triggering this time is. And they're just phoning to check in and see that I'm okay. One more thing I'd like to say about the recovery. In the last few months, I've joined a support group on Facebook, and that has been very, very helpful, reading other people's accounts, um, finding out that things like me feeling the cold really badly is actually very common in sepsis survivors. And all those things that I sort of thought, gosh, am I just losing it, or is it normal? And that's been very helpful. And I've also spoken to the sepsis trust nurses. I've spoken to Emma, and she was fantastic. But you just need to do what's right for you and your family. And take one day at a time, and it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks because they don't know what you've experienced. And also, what my therapist said to me, that unfortunately, because this is only the first year afterwards, she said, you are going to have to just roll with it. She said, because you don't know how your body's going to respond. And she said, if you need to cry, you cry. If you need to be angry, you be angry. She said, next year and going forward, you'll be able to know how you responded this year. But for this year, unfortunately, you are just going to have to roll with it and see what happens. But from next year, you can put things in place accordingly. Um, but yes, I am very grateful to be here. And sometimes it still doesn't feel like it's quite my life. But I think I do still have some flashbacks to the dreams that I had and the hospital, and sometimes songs that I remember from my time of being ill. And then the tears do just roll and roll and roll. And yeah, I think also in the beginning I felt quite robbed. I felt robbed of my 5 weeks with my boy. I read a lot of people's stories. I read loads of stories on the website on the sepsis. I I couldn't even keep up sometimes because there were just so many stories. But it was really, really very helpful for me to read that. But other than that, I actually didn't really have any knowledge of the actual symptoms. I didn't know that until I was sick. So I've now obviously found out that. But at the same time, and this is something I also wanted to say about just trusting your body, because the fact that I was told on Christmas Eve it's just flu, and then to be in an induced coma less than 24 hours later is just very, very, very worrying. I think what I would say is I know it must be very hard because you obviously are, you've got a lot of people to see, you've got sort of timelines and things like that in seeing patients, but they need to see the bigger picture. So I have no idea why, after doing my signs, did they think that it wasn't worth taking me into hospital to check. Surely it would have been better erring on the side of caution rather. I mean, it's devastating to think that had they left me, I probably would have died on Christmas Day in front of my child. And you need to be able to make exceptions, because there are these exceptions that actually people know inside that something is not right. I don't usually feel like this when I have the flu. I don't feel right. I feel like I'm going to die. And I needed somebody to listen and say, actually, you know what? It's Christmas Day. I don't think this person is going to be faking it. We need to just do it and get her sorted.
Mhm.
And that for me is the key thing that I would like to say, because things could have turned out very, very differently that Christmas Day